My name is Marina, and I'm 33 years old. I married a quiet man because I thought I'd finally found peace. He was gentle, patient, the kind of man who made the world feel safe again. But after years together, I learned his silence wasn't calm, it was a cover. One night, when I opened the door to the office he always kept locked, I found dozens of old newspaper articles about missing women, different names, different towns, but every face looked exactly like mine. If you'd asked me a few years ago what I wanted most in life, I would have said peace, quiet mornings, a warm home, and someone steady to share it with. After years of chaos, heartbreak, and noise, I thought I'd found exactly that in Nathan. When I met him, I was still reeling from the end of a 6-year relationship that had burned itself to ashes. My ex was loud, controlling, and manipulative. Every argument felt like a storm I couldn't escape. So, when Nathan appeared, calm as a still lake, his silence felt like safety. I didn't realize then how deceptive silence could be. It happened on an ordinary afternoon in a small bookstore downtown. I was in the travel section, pretending to plan a trip I'd never take, when a deep voice said softly, "That's a good one." I turned and saw him, tall, dark hair, simple clothes, and the kind of steady gaze that didn't dart away. He was holding the same book I had, about the quiet towns of the Pacific Northwest. I laughed awkwardly, and he smiled just enough to make me feel seen. Nathan wasn't like other men I'd met. He didn't rush to fill the air with small talk or stories about himself. Instead, he listened, really listened. Every word I spoke seemed to sink deep, and he'd nod as if cataloging it somewhere important. That first conversation lasted an hour, but I left knowing almost nothing about him. Still, when he asked for my number, I gave it without hesitation. Our relationship moved quickly, though it never felt rushed. Nathan was the kind of man who made things easy. He never raised his voice. He never criticized me. When we disagreed, he'd quietly step back, give me space, and return later with an apology. I mistook that restraint for kindness. It's strange now how control can look so much like patience when you're desperate to be loved gently. Within a year, he proposed. There was no elaborate plan, just dinner at home, soft music, and the questions spoken almost like a whisper. I said yes before he could even finish asking. We married in a small ceremony with only a few close friends and no family on his side. He said his parents had passed years ago, and he'd lost touch with any relatives. His voice cracked slightly when he said it, and I never pushed for details. We moved into his home, a neat 2-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was exactly the kind of place I'd always dreamed of. Tidy, modest, with a little garden out back. The neighbors were polite, but distant. And though I occasionally waved, I rarely spoke to them. Strangely, they never seemed curious about us either. Nathan worked from home as a freelance data analyst. His office, a small room down the hall from our bedroom, was strictly off limits. He said he dealt with confidential client data and couldn't risk leaks. I didn't question it much. Everyone deserves their space, I told myself. Still, some things didn't add up. He had no photos from childhood, not even a high school yearbook. He didn't have a single social media account, not Facebook, not Instagram, not even LinkedIn. Privacy's the last real luxury, he told me once, and I admired that. After all, I was used to people oversharing every detail of their lives online. Nathan, in contrast, was mysterious, self-contained, a man untouched by the noise of the world. But over time, that mystery began to feel heavier. Sometimes, when I'd mention my family or old friends, he'd quickly steer the conversation elsewhere. Once, I asked about his parents' names, and he simply said, "They wouldn't mean anything to you." His voice had an edge then, soft but final. I never asked again. There were other little things, too. He'd flinch during crime shows or news reports about missing people. He'd change the channel without explanation, sometimes even leaving the room entirely. If I asked why, he'd shrug and say, "I just don't like that kind of negativity." I told myself he was just sensitive, a quiet man with a kind heart. At night, he liked to sit on the porch in silence, staring into the dark. I'd join him sometimes, and he'd just hold my hand without saying a word. I thought it was romantic, the kind of wordless comfort I'd never known. But looking back, I realized how little I really knew about the man beside me. Months passed in routine predictability. I cooked, cleaned, worked part-time as a freelance editor, and tended to the garden. Nathan worked long hours behind that locked door. I'd hear his keyboard clicking deep into the night. Sometimes he'd print documents, the low hum of the printer echoing faintly through the hall. Once, when I asked what he worked on, he smiled faintly and said, "Just data." That word, data, covered everything and nothing. The more I tried to know him, the less he gave me. His silence became something like a wall, one I kept telling myself not to climb. Because what if, on the other side, I found something I didn't want to see? One evening, while cooking dinner, I caught sight of him through the kitchen window, standing motionless in the yard, staring at nothing. When I called his name, he didn't react right away. Then, as if suddenly aware of being watched, he smiled and waved. I felt a chill, but I laughed it off. People drift in thought sometimes. That night, as we ate, he mentioned he might travel soon, just a few days for work. I asked where, and he said, "Nowhere important." Then he reached for my hand and said, "You trust me, don't you?" I said I did. And in that moment, I truly believed it. For all his odd habits, Nathan had never hurt me, never lied, at least not that I could prove. His quiet felt safe, and I was tired of doubting. I told myself that peace always feels strange when you've lived in chaos. Maybe I was just unlearning what love could look like. If I had known what that silence hid, I never would have married him. It was nearly 3 months later, long after midnight, when I woke to the sound of the printer running. A steady mechanical hum echoed down the hallway. At first I thought I was dreaming. Nathan was asleep beside me, or so I thought. The glow under the office door flickered faintly, and my curiosity won over caution. I crept closer, barefoot, listening. The printer clicked again, spitting out one more sheet of paper. Through the crack under the door, I saw the edge of it flutter to the floor. When the sound stopped, I waited a minute, then quietly turned the knob. The door was locked, as always. But through the narrow sliver of light, I could see the page that had fallen closest to the gap. It was upside down, but I could still read the bold type near the top. It was my name, Marina Thomas, followed by a date I didn't recognize. My blood went cold. I stepped back, heart pounding, as the light under the door blinked off. Then, from the other side, I heard the soft creak of a chair turning, and I knew Nathan was awake. One night, she hears his office printer running at 3 a.m. and sees her own name on one of the printed papers. I used to trust him completely, until curiosity pushed me toward that locked door. After that night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of the printer kept looping in my head, over and over like a broken lullaby. I'd seen my name on that sheet of paper, bold, deliberate. But when I woke up the next morning, the office was silent. Nathan was already gone, his side of the bed cold. I stood outside that locked door, my hand resting on the handle. It didn't budge. The keypad above it blinked softly, waiting for a code I didn't know. A simple electronic lock, but it felt like a wall between two worlds. One where I was his wife, and one where I was something else entirely. When Nathan came home that evening, I decided to ask. My voice shook slightly as I said, "What do you keep in there, really?" He didn't even look up from the mail. "Work documents," he replied, the same way he always did. "I know," I said, forcing a smile, "but I mean, what kind of work? You've never really told me." He finally looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Why does it matter?" "It doesn't," I lied. "I'm just curious." He set the mail down, walked over, and rested his hands on my shoulders. "You trust me, don't you, Marina?" The question came out soft, almost tender, but there was something in his eyes that made my stomach twist. "Yes," I whispered. "Then don't ask about the office again." That should have been the end of it. But the more I tried not to think about that door, the more it consumed me. Every time I walked past it, I felt it pulling at me, whispering that something inside needed to be seen. Days passed, and I began to notice new things. Nathan started leaving earlier than usual, sometimes before dawn, and coming home after dark. When I asked about his schedule, he said his clients were overseas, but he never spoke about them, never mentioned names or projects. At night, I'd wake to the sound of his voice in the next room, low, urgent murmurs through the walls. Once, I heard him say, No, not again. Followed by silence. When I confronted him the next morning, he smiled like I'd imagined it. You dream loudly sometimes, he said. I checked his phone once when he was in the shower. There were almost no messages. The few that existed had been deleted, leaving behind only empty timestamps. The apps he did have, encrypted ones with strange icons, were all password protected. I told myself I was being paranoid. That's what love does. It trains you to explain away the things that should scare you. Then, one afternoon, while trimming the front hedges, I spoke briefly with our neighbor, Mrs. Porter. She was in her late 60s, kind-faced, the type who always waved from her porch. She asked where Nathan was that day, and I said he was working downtown. Her brow furrowed slightly. That's funny, she said. I could have sworn I saw him this morning near the old gas station off Route 5. I laughed it off, but my heart dropped into my stomach. That was 20 miles away, and he'd left in a different direction. When Nathan returned home that night, his shirt was damp with sweat despite the cool air. I asked about his day, and he smiled, saying, "Just meetings." Later, I found a small receipt in his jacket pocket from that same gas station Mrs. Porter had mentioned. The timestamp matched the hour he'd supposedly been downtown. I didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, I started paying attention to everything. He always carried the same leather briefcase, never letting it out of his sight. He took it even when he just stepped out to get groceries. When I once offered to carry it for him, he pulled it back sharply and said, "I've got it." That was when I began doubting myself, not just him. Maybe I was losing it. Maybe the years of anxiety and betrayal had made me overly suspicious. But then the evidence began to find me. One evening while cleaning, I noticed the floorboard under his desk chair looked slightly uneven. When I pried it up, I found a few folded receipts tucked beneath. One from a motel 3 towns over, another from a hardware store listing duct tape, gloves, and rope. My hands shook as I put everything back. For a week, I couldn't eat. I pretended everything was normal, laughed at his jokes, cooked dinner, kissed him goodnight. But inside, I was unraveling. Then came the day the power went out. It was mid-afternoon, and a storm had knocked out electricity across the neighborhood. Nathan was out. He'd left early that morning, saying he had errands. The house was silent except for the soft ticking of the wall clock. I walked down the hall, flashlight in hand, and when I reached his office, I noticed something strange. The red light on the keypad was blinking erratically. Then, with a small click, it went dark, and the lock disengaged. My heart pounded so hard I thought I'd faint. The storm had disabled the electronic lock. For the first time since moving in, the door was open. I pushed it slowly. The smell hit me first, a mix of printer ink, paper, and something faintly metallic. The blinds were drawn tight, and the air felt heavier inside, as though the room hadn't been opened in years. The desk was immaculate, not a pen out of place, but the drawers, they were filled with papers, stacks of them, files, folders, printouts, organized meticulously by date. I scanned the labels, client reports, financial analysis, research. Then one caught my eye. It was a thin folder marked with a woman's name, Lydia Marks. The name meant nothing to me, but curiosity outweighed fear. I opened it and froze. Inside were printed news articles, each detailing the story of a missing woman. Lydia Marks, age 29, last seen leaving her home in Oregon nearly a decade ago. Her photo smiled up at me, young, brown hair, soft eyes. I shuffled through the papers, my hands trembling. There were more clippings in the same folder, different women, different towns. Each article was highlighted, dates underlined, notes scribbled in Nathan's handwriting. A faint noise made me turn. The storm outside had quieted, and for a moment all I could hear was my own breathing. I knew I shouldn't have been there. I knew if he came home and found me, there would be no pretending after that. But I couldn't stop reading. The last sheet in the pile caught my attention. It looked newer than the rest, freshly printed. The headline made my vision blur. Local woman still missing after 10 years. Husband remains a suspect. I stared at the name beneath it, my heart hammering louder than the thunder outside, because the suspect's photo, though grainy and old, looked eerily familiar. It looked like Nathan. The first article headline reads, "Local woman still missing after 10 years. Husband remains a suspect. I told myself it couldn't be him, but every name on those pages proved otherwise. For a long time, I just stared at the article. My hands were shaking so badly I could hardly hold the page steady. Local woman still missing. After 10 years. Husband remains a suspect. The headline burned into my mind. The photo beneath it showed a man, blurred, grainy, but the shape of his jaw, the slope of his shoulders, even the faint curve of his mouth. It was Nathan, or maybe someone who looked too much like him to be coincidence. I told myself it couldn't be true. There had to be an explanation. Maybe he'd been researching cold cases for some freelance project, or maybe he just had a strange fascination with unsolved crimes. But as I flipped through the folder, those excuses began to crumble. There weren't just a few articles, there were dozens. Each one told a similar story. A woman between the ages of 25 and 35, missing without a trace. Each disappearance happened in small towns, scattered across different states. Oregon, Colorado, Utah, Washington, and in every case, the husband or boyfriend was suspected, questioned, and then quietly cleared for lack of evidence. The photos haunted me. Every woman shared something in common. Dark hair, soft brown eyes, that same gentle, trusting smile. It was like looking into a mirror over and over again. Some were teachers, nurses, waitresses. Some disappeared on their way home from work, others after weekend trips. Each article had been printed, highlighted, and annotated in Nathan's careful handwriting. Besides some names, there were short notes written in blue ink. Good location, no family ties, quiet neighborhood. My stomach twisted as I realized what those notes might mean. I moved to the next folder, labeled Miscellaneous. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a map of the western United States marked with dozens of tiny red dots. I leaned closer, tracing them with my fingertip. Each dot had a name written beside it. Lydia Marks, Anna Brewer, Celeste Hayes. Names I now recognized from the articles. I followed the pattern across the map, and that's when it hit me. Every town was near a place Nathan once mentioned, living or working. The map ended with one last red dot in our current town. Next to it, he'd written my name. My breath hitched. I stumbled back from the desk, nearly knocking over a chair. My pulse thundered in my ears. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at that map like it might reach out and pull me in. He couldn't be involved in this. He couldn't. Nathan, who made me tea when I was sick. Nathan, who kissed my forehead every morning. Nathan, who said he'd never hurt me. But the facts didn't lie. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and began taking photos. Every page, every map, every note. My heart raced as I clicked through, making sure each image was clear. I didn't know what I'd do with them yet. I just knew I needed proof, something real in case everything else disappeared. By the time I finished, the storm had cleared and the sun was sinking low behind the blinds. I could feel the light changing in the room and panic surged through me. He could come home any minute. I shoved the folders back exactly as I'd found them, straightened the chair, and slipped out of the office. My hands were slick with sweat as I quietly shut the door, praying the lock would reactivate before he noticed. When I heard his car pull into the driveway moments later, my heart nearly stopped. I forced myself to sit calmly on the couch, pretending to read. Nathan stepped through the door, smiling that same quiet smile. "You okay?" he asked, hanging up his coat. "Yeah," I said too quickly. "Just a headache." He studied me for a moment longer than usual, then nodded slowly. "You look tired." I laughed nervously. Didn't sleep well. He crossed the room and brushed his hand across my cheek. His fingers felt cold. "You should rest," he murmured. I nodded, trying not to flinch under his touch. Inside, I was screaming. That evening, I barely spoke. I watched him move around the kitchen, the way he handled the knives, the deliberate precision in every motion. He hummed softly as he cooked, just as he always did. But now every note sounded off-key. After dinner, I excused myself early. My head spun with thoughts. What if he found out? What if he checked his office? What if he already knew I'd been inside? When he finally came to bed, I pretended to be asleep. I could feel him lying beside me, his breathing slow and even. But after a while, I heard the faint click of his phone screen. Light flashed across the wall for a second, then vanished. He was awake, watching. I didn't close my eyes once that night. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every rustle of the sheets felt like danger. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, that the map, the notes, the names meant nothing sinister. But deep down, I already knew. Because I'd seen that final red dot. My name, my town, my life. When the first light of morning finally broke through the curtains, I reached for my phone, desperate to reassure myself that I had proof of what I'd seen, that it hadn't been some fever dream. But as I unlocked the screen, my stomach dropped. The camera roll was empty. Every photo I'd taken the day before, gone, deleted. All that remained was a single new image, a photo of me asleep in bed. The timestamp read 3:14 a.m. My hand trembled as I stared at the screen, unable to breathe. He'd been awake that night, watching me, taking pictures. And he knew, he had to know, I'd been inside that office. For the first time, I realized just how deep his silence went. It wasn't peaceful, it wasn't patient. It was the silence of someone who knew he didn't need to speak to control everything, and now he controlled me too. The next morning, she checks her phone. The photos she took are gone, deleted. He smiled at me across breakfast, and I knew he knew. The next morning, I tried to pretend everything was normal. The house smelled of coffee and toast, sunlight pooling across the kitchen floor like nothing was wrong. Nathan stood by the counter stirring his mug, humming softly to himself. The same man I'd married, the same calm, collected expression, only now every movement felt calculated. "Morning," he said, smiling. That smile, too even, too measured. "Morning," I whispered, trying to steady my voice. He gestured toward the table. "I made breakfast for us." I sat, barely tasting the eggs. My stomach twisted with each bite. The entire time, he watched me. Not lovingly, not curiously, just watched. His eyes didn't waver. He poured me more coffee, even though my cup was still full. "You didn't sleep much last night," he said. His tone was casual, but the way he said it, soft, observant, made my skin crawl. I forced a laugh. I guess I was restless. He nodded, smiling faintly. "You should try to relax, Marina. You worry too much." When he leaned forward, his sleeve lifted slightly, revealing a faint red mark along his wrist, like a scratch. My breath caught. I wondered if he'd gotten it last night, while reaching over me to take that picture. We finished breakfast in silence, but in that silence, I could feel it. He knew. He knew I'd been inside his office. After he left for work, if that's where he really went, I paced the house, mind spinning. Every sound felt amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of floorboards, the faint tick of the clock. I felt like I was being watched even when I was alone. That evening, I noticed the first camera. It was tucked discreetly in the corner of the living room, disguised as a smoke detector. At first, I thought maybe it was a trick of the light, but when I climbed up on a chair, I saw the tiny red blink of an active recording light. There was another one above the kitchen doorway, and another in the hallway outside the bedroom. He was watching me. When Nathan came home, I forced myself to act normal, but every smile felt brittle. Over dinner, I brought it up as lightly as I could. "Hey, I noticed you installed some new cameras," I said, stirring my pasta to hide the tremor in my hand. He didn't look up. "Security," he said simply. "For what?" He met my eyes then, that faint half-smile returning. "To keep us safe. You never know who might try to break in." I felt my throat tighten. Right, safety. He leaned back, studying me. "You don't like feeling watched?" I shook my head. "It's fine." But inside, I was screaming. Later that night, I tried to call my friend Clara, someone I hadn't spoken to in months. I waited until Nathan was in the shower, whispering into the phone like I was confessing a sin. "Clara, I need help. I think—" The line went dead. At first, I thought it was my phone, but when I tried again, I got only static. My Wi-Fi connection was gone too. When Nathan came out of the bathroom, towel around his neck, he said, "Oh, by the way, the phone lines might be down. I'll call the provider tomorrow." His tone was casual, but his eyes flickered toward the nightstand, where my phone sat. I realized then that I couldn't rely on anything inside this house. So I found a new way to speak, one he couldn't trace. The next morning, while he was gone, I pulled up a vent cover behind the dresser and slid a small notebook inside. I started writing everything down. Every observation, every odd behavior, every fear. It became my hidden record, my one lifeline to sanity. But the comfort didn't last. A week later, Nathan came home early. I was in the living room reading when he walked in, eyes bright, calm as ever. He sat beside me and said, "You write beautifully, Marina. I didn't know you journaled." My blood turned to ice. He smiled faintly. "You should be careful where you hide things. Dust collects easily in vents." He got up, kissed the top of my head, and went upstairs. I sat frozen, heart pounding. He'd found it. He'd read everything. That night, I pretended to be asleep. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the heating system. Around 2 a.m., I heard his footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving toward the bed. He stopped beside me, close enough that I could feel his breath on my neck. "You shouldn't have looked," he whispered. My eyes burned with tears, but I didn't move. I waited until I heard him walk away before letting myself breathe again. The next morning, I decided I couldn't live like this anymore. I had to find out who he really was and how deep this went. But leaving wasn't simple. Nathan had gradually taken control of everything. The bank accounts were in his name. The car was registered to him. Even my driver's license had been misplaced weeks earlier. When I mentioned it, he'd said, "I'll order a replacement for you." It never arrived. I was trapped. Still, I had one idea left. I walked to the local library that afternoon, pretending I just needed to print something for work. Using a public computer, I searched for the names I'd seen on his map: Lydia Marks, Anna Brewer, Celeste Hayes. Each one led to a missing person case spanning decades. I scrolled through forums, local news archives, police bulletins. My hands trembled as I typed. Then I saw it, a composite sketch from a cold case in Montana, dated 12 years ago. The suspect was described as a quiet man with dark hair, mid-30s. The sketch was crude, smudged from age, but when I zoomed in, my breath caught. The eyes, the jaw, the faint scar near the mouth. It was Nathan. I printed the page, folded it, and slipped it into my coat pocket. My pulse wouldn't slow. When I got home, the house was dark. His car sat in the driveway, but the lights were off. "Nathan?" I called softly. No answer. I went upstairs, my footsteps careful, every shadow stretching too long. When I opened the bedroom door, I saw it immediately, my laptop, sitting open on the desk, glowing softly in the dim room. The screen displayed a single file titled Marina. My fingers trembled as I approached. The document contained only a few lines. Name: Marina Thomas, date of birth. My birth date. Status: next entry. I dropped the laptop, stumbling backward. That was when I realized I wasn't just living with a stranger. I was next on his list. When she returns home, her laptop screen glows with one open file. Her full name, birth date, and the words, next entry. Her face looked just like mine, and her name was Emily. After that night with the open laptop, I stopped pretending. The fear was too heavy, too constant. I moved through each day like an actress trapped inside a role, smiling when he smiled, laughing when he spoke, but every second felt like a countdown. I couldn't unsee that file. Next entry. My name, my birthday, written in the same clean, deliberate font Nathan used for everything. I didn't need to guess what it meant. I knew. Still, I had to be smart. I couldn't run, not yet. He'd find me. He always seemed to know where I went, what I touched, what I thought. So instead, I decided to know him. I started with the names from the articles. The library had become my secret refuge, the one place he couldn't watch me. Every morning after he left, I'd tell him I was running errands, then drive straight there. That's where I found her. Her name was Emily Travers, 29 years old, missing 6 years ago from a small town in northern Idaho, the same town Nathan once mentioned working in for a data project. At first, it was just another name on a long list of victims, but something about her photo stopped me cold. The soft brown hair, the round cheeks, the faint dimple near her left eye. She looked like me. No, she looked exactly like me. I stared at the image for nearly an hour, my heart thudding. The resemblance was uncanny. Even our smiles had the same cautious curve. Emily had been dating a man named Daniel Rourke when she disappeared. No one knew much about him. He'd rented a house near a lake outside town and left suddenly after she went missing. Neighbors said he was polite, quiet, the kind of man who never made trouble. That phrase hit me like a slap. Quiet, always quiet. The more I read, the sicker I felt. Emily was last seen packing for a weekend trip to an abandoned cabin by the water. Her friend said Daniel told her it would be a romantic getaway. She never came back. The article included a photo of Daniel. The resolution was poor, but it didn't matter. Even with the graininess, I recognized the curve of his smile, the shadow of his jawline, the small mole near his temple. It was Nathan, or at least it had been. I printed the image and slipped it into my purse. On the drive home, I stopped at a small diner, shaking as I folded the picture into a cookbook I'd bought weeks earlier. I hid it between 2 pages, pressing it flat before closing the cover. It was the only proof I had, proof I prayed he'd never find. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my hands were trembling so badly I could barely put the car in park. The house looked the same as always, curtains drawn, porch light glowing faintly in the dusk. But it no longer felt like home. It felt like a trap waiting to spring shut. Nathan greeted me at the door, smiling as always. "You're late," he said, taking my bag gently from my shoulder. "Traffic," I murmured. He nodded. "I made dinner." The table was already set, candles lit, music playing softly in the background. It would have been romantic once, but now it felt staged. His gestures were too precise, too rehearsed. Halfway through the meal, he set his fork down and looked at me across the table. "You've seemed distant lately." I froze. He smiled faintly. "Is everything okay, Marina?" I forced myself to nod. "Just tired. Maybe it's the weather." He tilted his head. "You sure? You know you can tell me anything." The way he said it sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't an offer. It was a warning. "I'm fine," I said softly. He watched me for a long time before leaning back in his chair. "Good. Because I was thinking, maybe we should get away for a while, just the 2 of us." My fork clattered against the plate. "A trip?" "Yeah." He smiled again, too wide this time. "We've both been stressed. You need some fresh air, time away from all this. There's a place I know. Quiet, private. You'll love it." Something inside me snapped into sharp focus. A quiet, private place. A weekend away. It was exactly how Emily's story had ended. I forced a smile, pretending to be touched. "That sounds perfect." His expression softened, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Good," he said. "I'll plan everything." That night, I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling. My heart beat so loudly I was afraid it would wake him. He'd done this before. The pattern was too perfect to ignore. He found women like me, isolated, trusting, hungry for quiet. He built a life around them, erased their identities, then moved on when they got too close to the truth. And now it was my turn. The next morning, I went to the police station, telling myself I was only going to file a noise complaint. It was the safest excuse I could think of. The officer behind the counter, a tired-looking woman named Sergeant Kelly, smiled politely as she filled out the form. I leaned on the counter, trying to sound casual. "I was reading about some old local cases," I said. "There was one about a woman named Emily Travers. Ever hear of it?" The sergeant's smile faded a little. "Yeah, that one's still open. Shame what happened. Never found her. The boyfriend skipped town the week after. No trace since." "Really?" I asked, my voice tight. "No one ever found him?" She shook her head. "Nope. Changed his name, probably. Guys like that always do." I thanked her, pretending not to shake, and left. By the time I got home, Nathan's car was in the driveway again. Inside, the house smelled of lilies. He was in the kitchen, arranging flowers in a vase. "For you," he said, handing me a single white stem, "for being such a good wife." I smiled weakly. My eyes darted to the countertop where his suitcase sat open. He'd started packing. Clothes folded neatly, toiletries arranged, everything ready. He turned toward me, his smile stretching wider. "We'll leave tomorrow morning. I promise you're going to love it out there." I forced myself to nod, whispering, "I can't wait." Later that night, when he fell asleep, I slipped quietly into the spare room. The suitcase was still there, half-zipped. My hands trembled as I lifted the flap, praying he wouldn't wake. At first I saw nothing unusual. shirts, socks, shaving kit. But then I noticed something tucked at the bottom, half hidden beneath a folded sweater. A roll of duct tape, and next to it, a neatly coiled length of rope. The air left my lungs. My knees nearly gave out. It wasn't a trip. It was a repeat. And I was about to become the next woman no one ever found. As she packs, she finds a roll of duct tape and rope already packed in his suitcase. I smiled through the fear as he drove us toward the woods. When the morning came, I told myself to stay calm. Panic would only get me killed. I packed carefully. Some clothes, a toothbrush, my wallet, nothing that would make him suspicious. Inside, I hid a small kitchen knife at the bottom of my bag. It was the only thing I could think of that might protect me. Nathan was cheerful as he loaded the car. Too cheerful. His mood had a brightness that felt staged, like an actor overplaying a role. "Ready for our little adventure?" he asked, holding the passenger door open for me. I forced a smile. "Of course." He leaned down and kissed my forehead before I got in. His lips felt cold. We drove for hours. At first the road was familiar, highways and small towns, but then he turned onto narrow, winding back roads that cut through the forest. The trees grew denser, the light dimmer. With every mile, cell service bars disappeared from my phone until there were none left. He hummed quietly as he drove, the same low tune he always did when he was focused. I stared out the window, pretending to admire the scenery, while inside, I rehearsed a dozen different escape plans. None of them felt good enough. After nearly 4 hours, he slowed the car and turned onto a gravel road, barely visible through the trees. A weathered wooden sign leaned to one side, the letters so faded I couldn't read them. The tires crunched over stones, and after another mile, we reached it, a small cabin nestled deep in the woods. It looked abandoned. The roof sagged slightly, and ivy crept up one side of the porch. There were no other houses in sight. No sounds but the distant rustle of leaves and the cry of crows. "Here we are," he said softly, smiling as if he'd just brought me to paradise. I swallowed hard. "It's beautiful." He watched my face, carefully, as if gauging whether I believed my own words. Then he nodded and began unloading our bags. Inside, the cabin was cleaner than I expected. Too clean. The air smelled faintly of bleach. There was a small kitchen, a single bedroom, and a living room with a stone fireplace. Everything looked staged, as if prepared for a guest who'd never arrive. Nathan dropped his keys onto the table and said, "No phones, no work, just us." He took my phone from my hand before I could protest and slipped it into his pocket. "Let's disconnect," he said with that same easy smile. I smiled back, because what else could I do? We spent the afternoon settling in. He unpacked meticulously, arranging things just so, while I wandered outside, pretending to admire the scenery. The trees stretched endlessly in every direction. There was no sound of traffic, no nearby houses, nothing but wilderness. Behind the cabin, I noticed something strange, a set of fresh footprints leading toward the woods. They weren't his shoes. These were smaller, lighter. I followed them a few feet until they vanished into the undergrowth. When I returned inside, he was standing at the window, watching me. "Don't wander off," he said quietly. "It's easy to get lost out here." His tone was soft, but the meaning was sharp as a blade. That evening we ate in silence. The fire crackled, and he poured us both glasses of wine. "To us," he said, raising his glass. I clinked mine against his, forcing another smile. The wine tasted bitter on my tongue. When we went to bed, I noticed something I hadn't before. The bedroom door had a lock on the outside. My stomach turned cold. As he turned off the lamp, I whispered, "Why is there a lock out there?" He turned to me, his eyes reflecting the dim firelight. "It's an old cabin," he said simply, "probably for safety." "Safety from what?" He smiled. "From whatever's outside." He turned away then, leaving me staring into the dark. He fell asleep quickly, his breathing slow, steady, and chillingly peaceful. I waited until I was sure he was asleep before slipping out of bed. Quietly, I reached under my sleeve and felt the handle of the small knife I'd hidden. I slid it under the pillow, just in case. The air outside the bedroom felt heavier. The cabin creaked, as if exhaling. My nerves buzzed with panic. I told myself to look for clues, anything that could tell me what he was planning. In the kitchen, I found a small door leading down to a root cellar. I almost didn't open it, but something inside me needed to know. The air down there was cold and smelled of damp earth. My flashlight flickered as I scanned the floor. Then I saw it, a half-buried metal box. I dug it out with shaking hands and pried it open. Inside were IDs, at least 6 of them, different names, different states. But every photo was Nathan's face, altered slightly, different haircuts, beards, glasses, but the same cold. Eyes. I covered my mouth to keep from screaming. A creak upstairs made me freeze. I turned off the flashlight, my heart slamming in my chest. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. "Nathan?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Silence, then the faintest reply, distant but unmistakable. "You shouldn't be down there." I ran. I flew up the stairs, out the front door, into the freezing night air. My feet were bare, but I didn't care. I ran through the trees, branches slashing my arms, my breath tearing in my throat. Behind me, I heard him calling my name. Not shouting, but calm, patient, like a predator who knows his prey has nowhere to go. "Marina," he called, "you'll get hurt out there." I didn't look back. The forest stretched endlessly, every direction looking the same. My lungs burned, my vision blurred. I didn't stop until I saw it, a flicker of light through the trees, a road. I stumbled toward it, crashing through the brush. Gravel cut into my feet as I reached the edge and waved frantically at the first pair of headlights I saw approaching. The vehicle slowed, tires crunching on the gravel. Relief surged through me so strong it nearly knocked me over. A truck, old, blue, with rust along the bumper. The driver rolled down the window, his face shadowed by the dim glow of the dashboard. "Please," I gasped, "help me, my husband." Then the man leaned forward into the light and smiled. It was Nathan. My scream echoed through the trees, swallowed by the dark. The driver slows down, then smiles. It's Nathan. I realized then he'd planned every escape I thought I had. The moment I saw Nathan behind the wheel, smiling from that truck, something inside me broke loose. Instinct took over. I didn't think. I moved. When he slowed down, pretending to be concerned, I bolted. I threw myself out of the passenger door before he could even reach for the lock. The gravel tore through my knees, pain slicing through me as I rolled into a shallow ditch by the roadside. "Marina." His voice echoed through the night. Calm, steady, like he had all the time in the world. I lay still, pressing my body into the cold earth, willing myself to disappear. The truck's headlights swept across the trees as he turned the vehicle around, searching. I held my breath, tasting blood and dirt on my tongue. He stopped, engine idling, and called out again. "You'll freeze out here. Come back to the cabin. We'll forget this happened." I didn't move. Not an inch. Finally, after what felt like hours, the sound of the engine faded into the distance. But I didn't believe he'd gone. Not really. I knew him too well by now. His patience, his precision. He was out there, somewhere, waiting for me to make the wrong move. When I finally crawled out of the ditch, my legs shook uncontrollably. I had no shoes, no phone, and only the moonlight to guide me. The woods stretched endless in every direction, black and whispering. I walked until I couldn't anymore, tripping over roots and stones. I found a creek and knelt beside it, cupping cold water in my hands, drinking greedily. My reflection rippled on the surface, mud-streaked, hollow-eyed, wild. That night felt like forever. I hid among the trees, curling beneath fallen branches to stay warm. Every crack of a twig made my heart leap. Sometime before dawn, I saw a light moving through the woods, a single flashlight beam, sweeping methodically. Nathan. I pressed a hand to my mouth to silence the sob that rose in my throat. He was close enough that I could hear the crunch of his boots on the forest floor. "I know you're scared," he called softly, "but I'm not angry, Marina. I understand why you ran." The light flicked closer, sweeping just inches from where I crouched. He paused. The beam lingered on a nearby tree, then drifted away. "I just want to talk," he said. "You're tired. You'll come back eventually. You always do." I stayed hidden until the sun began to rise, until the sound of his voice finally vanished. Only then did I start walking again. I followed the creek, hoping it would lead to a road, a town, anything. My feet were torn and raw, but I couldn't stop. Every rustle behind me felt like him. Every bird call, every gust of wind felt like a warning. I kept thinking about all the signs I'd ignored. The locked office, the erased photos, the hidden cameras, the too perfect calm. All the things I'd told myself were love or privacy or patience. How many times had I mistaken control for care? By late morning, I stumbled out of the woods and onto a cracked two-lane road. The relief that hit me made me dizzy. Civilization, safety, maybe. I walked until I saw a small gas station up ahead, a squat building with faded red paint and an old payphone bolted to the wall. I nearly cried at the sight of it. Inside, the clerk looked up as I entered. He was middle-aged, wearing a stained baseball cap. "You okay, miss?" he asked, eyes widening at the sight of me, barefoot, dirty, shaking. "I need help," I gasped. "Please, I think my husband's trying to kill me." He frowned, glancing toward the window. "You need to call the cops." "Yes, please don't let anyone—" Before I could finish, a car passed outside. My heart stopped. For a second, I thought it was Nathan's truck. The clerk must have seen the terror in my face because he locked the front door immediately. "Sit down," he said, grabbing the phone. "You're safe here." While he spoke to the dispatcher, I scanned the walls, maps, calendars, and a small corkboard covered in local news clippings. And there it was. A familiar face stared back at me from an old, yellowed newspaper clipping pinned near the register. A photo of Nathan, or rather, Daniel Rourke. The headline read, "Police renew search for missing Idaho woman. Boyfriend still wanted for questioning." The clerk caught me staring. "That guy," he said quietly. "You know him." My voice trembled. "He's my husband." He froze, then looked back at the photo. Holy hell. He picked up the phone again. "Tell them to hurry," he barked into the receiver. He ushered me toward the restroom. "Stay in there and lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but the police." I nodded, stumbling inside. The tile was cold beneath my feet. I locked the door and pressed my back against it, trying not to sob. Minutes crawled by like hours. Every noise outside made me jump. I could hear the faint sound of sirens somewhere far away, growing closer maybe. Then came the sound I'd been dreading, a truck engine. It stopped right outside the station. I heard the clerk's muffled voice, calm at first, then tense. "Sir, we're closed right now." Then a loud crash followed by a thud. I clamped a hand over my mouth, tears spilling down my cheeks. "Marina!" Nathan's voice rang through the building. "I told you it's dangerous out here." I didn't breathe. I didn't move. The handle rattled once, twice, then silence. I heard footsteps receding, the door chime jingling as someone left. Moments later, the sirens arrived, loud now, filling the air. I flung the door open as 2 officers rushed in, weapons drawn. The clerk was alive, shaken but bleeding from a cut on his head. "He went that way," the man stammered, pointing toward the woods. Police searched for hours, helicopters circling overhead. They found the truck abandoned about 2 miles down the road. The driver's seat was empty, the ground around it covered in fresh footprints that disappeared into the forest. Nathan was gone. At the station, I gave my statement in full. Every detail from the day I met him to the moment I jumped from that truck. The detectives listened carefully, exchanging glances. When I handed over the small SD card I'd hidden inside my shoe, the photos, the copies, the map, they finally believed me. "This matches some of our cold cases," one detective said. "If this man is who we think he is, he's been using fake identities for at least 15 years. They promised to reopen the investigations, promised to find him, but promises can't keep you safe at night. They placed me in a temporary safe house outside the county, a small apartment with barred windows and a lock I changed myself. For the first time in weeks, I slept without hearing his footsteps in the hall, until 3 days later. That morning, I opened the door to find an unmarked envelope on the floor. No postage, no return address, just my name written neatly on the front. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single photograph. It was me, sleeping in the safe house bed. And in the corner of the image, faintly reflected in the mirror, was a shadow I recognized. Nathan. Days later, Marina receives an unmarked envelope at the safe house. Inside is a photo of her sleeping. I thought he was gone for good. until I saw him in the reflection behind me. After the photo arrived at the safe house, I didn't sleep for 3 nights. Every creak, every hum of the refrigerator sounded like footsteps. When the police dusted the envelope for prints, they found nothing. No usable evidence, no DNA. Probably a sick prank, one of them said. But we all knew better. Nathan wasn't done with me. The authorities placed me in witness protection soon after. They gave me a new name, a new town, a new identity. Marina became Lily, at least on paper. I dyed my hair, changed my style, and moved to a small town 2 states away. My new apartment was plain and sterile, but it was safe, or it was supposed to be. For a while, I tried to convince myself I could start over. I began therapy for PTSD, attending sessions twice a week. My therapist, Dr. Harper, had kind eyes and never pushed me too hard. "You're not crazy," she told me. "You're surviving." Still, the past clung to me like smoke. I jumped at loud noises. I couldn't stand silence anymore. Even the sound of paper printing made my skin crawl. Every morning, I checked the locks 3 times. I memorized escape routes, kept my phone charged and hidden, and slept with a flashlight beside my bed. But despite everything, I tried to live. A shadow of a life, maybe, but a life nonetheless. Then one ordinary afternoon, everything cracked again. I was at the grocery store, standing in line with a basket of produce, when I saw him, or rather, someone who looked like him. He stood 2 aisles away, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses. He wasn't looking at me, but something about the posture, the tilt of his head, the calm stillness of his hands, froze me in place. My throat went dry. My vision tunneled. It couldn't be. It couldn't. But when the man turned, just slightly, I saw the faint outline of a scar near his temple, the same one Nathan had. The basket slipped from my hands. Apples rolled across the tile. The man didn't move, didn't flinch, just smiled. I ran. I left my groceries, my cart, everything. I sprinted to my car, locking the doors before my hands could stop shaking. My heart slammed against my ribs as I scanned the parking lot. He was gone, just like that. That night, when I got home, I double-checked every lock, every window. Everything looked untouched until I reached the front door. The latch was open, not broken, not forced, just open, as if someone had turned the handle gently from the outside. I backed away slowly, my pulse roaring in my ears. The police came again, combed the apartment, found nothing. "You probably forgot to lock it," they said, even though I knew I hadn't. I started keeping a logbook after that, writing down every noise, every creak, every unfamiliar car outside. Date, time, sound, duration. It gave me some illusion of control, even as fear became my constant companion. Weeks passed, then months. Life settled into a fragile rhythm. I told myself that maybe he was gone, that maybe the man in the store had just been a ghost, conjured by trauma. But deep down, I knew Nathan wasn't a ghost. He was real, patient, watching. Then one morning, Detective Reeves, one of the officers who'd handled my case, called me. His voice was tight, serious. "Marina, sorry, Lily, we found something." My stomach twisted. "What is it?" "Your old home, the one you shared with him. We finally processed new prints. Guess whose we found on the back door handle?" I didn't have to ask. "Nathan," he said quietly. "Fresh ones, less than a week old." I sank into the nearest chair, my body trembling. He'd been there, recently. Reeves sighed. "We're doing everything we can to track him. He's changed names before. He'll do it again, but he's getting sloppy. That's good for us." Maybe for them. But for me, it meant something else entirely. He was close. I spent the next few days in constant terror, jumping at every sound. I stopped sleeping altogether. I taped the blinds shut, unplugged every light that cast a shadow too large. And then, out of nowhere, a journalist contacted me. Her name was Samantha Keene, a crime reporter who'd been following the string of cold cases tied to Nathan, though she didn't call him Nathan. "I think your husband was using multiple aliases," she said. "One of them, Adrian Pike, appears in several police databases linked to missing persons." "Adrian Pike?" I repeated. "Yes, that's his real name." Hearing it spoken aloud made my stomach churn. Adrian Pike. The man I'd called Nathan, the man I'd loved, didn't even exist. Samantha wanted to write an expose. "I think it's time the truth comes out," she said, "about what he did, and about the women who were never found." I hesitated. Trust didn't come easily anymore, but she sounded genuine. Her voice carried a steady calm that reminded me of who I used to be, someone who believed in truth, in justice, in people. So I agreed. I gave her everything: the scanned files, my journal, the SD card, the photo of Emily Travers, the copies of his fake IDs. I wanted the world to know who he really was. 2 weeks later, the story broke. The headline read, "Serial Predator Exposed. Adrian Pike's trail of disappearances spans 15 years." The article was everywhere. News broadcasts, podcasts, social media. They aired photos of him, reconstructed timelines, interviews with victims' families. My face was blurred, my name changed, but my story was there, spread across the country. For a moment, I felt a strange kind of relief. Maybe this was it. Maybe exposure would finally end the nightmare. But it didn't. Because that same evening, the local news anchor's voice shifted tone mid-broadcast. I'll never forget her expression: calm, professional, and then slightly shaken. "Breaking update," she said. "Authorities confirmed that Adrian Pike remains at large. The suspect was reportedly sighted earlier today near the state border. Local residents are urged to remain cautious." The camera cut to a grainy image, security footage from a gas station, a man filling his car at the pump, sunglasses, baseball cap, the faint scar by his temple. Nathan. I felt the air leave my lungs. Then came the final words, the ones that made my blood turn to ice. "The suspect has been spotted just 3 miles from where you are now." I stared at the screen, frozen. My reflection in the black glass of the TV was pale, trembling, and behind me, in that reflection, was a shadow standing near the window. The final report ends with, "He's been spotted just 3 miles from where you are now." For years I ran from his shadow. Now I'm the one telling his story. The morning after that news broadcast, I left town for good. The reflection in the glass, the shadow behind me, haunted my every step, but I refused to look back. I didn't stop until I reached the police station 2 counties over, exhausted and shaking. For once, they didn't question me. They knew the name Adrian Pike. Everyone did by then. The journalist's expose had gone viral overnight. Every headline, every screen, every radio station was repeating his name. The public finally knew who he was. The man behind decades of disappearances. The man I had once called my husband. The media called me the survivor who broke the silence. I hated the label at first. I didn't feel brave. I felt broken. But when families of his victims began reaching out, voices trembling through phone calls, letters, messages, I realized what I had done mattered. I wasn't just running anymore. I was speaking for all of them. And then, after months of searching, they caught him. It happened on a rainy morning in a small coastal town in Oregon. A highway patrol officer pulled over a white sedan with expired tags. The driver handed over fake papers under the name Michael West. But when the officer looked up, something in the man's calm, quiet face made his stomach twist. He'd seen that face on the news. Backup arrived within minutes. Adrian Pike, Nathan, was arrested without a fight. No struggle, no resistance, just the same eerie composure I remembered. When the call came, I didn't know whether to cry or scream. Instead, I just sat on the floor of my new apartment, shaking, whispering, "It's over." But of course, it wasn't really over, not until I faced him. Months later, I found myself standing outside a courthouse, the wind off the Pacific cold against my skin. Reporters lined the steps, their cameras flashing like lightning. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and old paper. I clutched my statement tightly in my hands, the words I'd rewritten 100 times. When they brought him in, I almost didn't recognize him. His hair was shorter, his face thinner, his hands cuffed, but those eyes, the calm, unblinking blue-gray eyes, were exactly the same. He didn't look at anyone, not the judge, not the lawyers, not the families of the women whose lives he'd destroyed. When my turn came to testify, I walked to the stand on trembling legs. I didn't look at him right away. I focused on the paper in front of me, on my own handwriting. "My name is Marina Thomas," I began, my voice shaking. I was his wife. The room went silent. I could hear the faint clicking of a camera shutter, the hum of the fluorescent lights above me. I told them everything. From the day I met him in that quiet bookstore, to the moment I jumped from his truck, to the photo of me sleeping that arrived at my safe house. I spoke for the women who never got the chance: Lydia Marks, Emily Travers, Celeste Hayes. Dozens of names that had once been forgotten. When I finally looked up at him, he met my gaze. His expression didn't change. Not anger, not fear, not guilt. Just silence. The same silence that had once made me feel safe, the same silence that had hidden monsters. "Why?" I asked him softly, even though I knew he wouldn't answer. "Why them? Why me?" He blinked once, slow and deliberate. No words. The prosecutor leaned toward me. "You don't have to address him directly," she whispered. But I kept speaking. "For years I thought silence meant peace," I said. "I thought being quiet made you kind. But silence can hide terrible things. It can bury screams. It can disguise cruelty as calm." My voice broke then, but I forced myself to continue. "He used silence to hide his crimes. I use my voice to expose them." I left the stand to a room that didn't breathe for several seconds. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Evidence after evidence, name after name. The IDs I'd found, the SD card, the fingerprints, the DNA from the cabin. All of it came together like pieces of a nightmare puzzle. The verdict came back guilty on every count. Multiple murders, kidnapping, identity fraud, interstate flight, destruction of evidence. When the judge read the sentence, life without parole, Nathan didn't flinch. He just stood there, hands clasped, eyes fixed on nothing. That was the last time I ever saw him. Afterward, I stepped outside into the gray afternoon. Reporters crowded the steps again, shouting questions. "Marina, how do you feel? What would you say to him if you could?" I didn't answer any of them. I just kept walking until the courthouse disappeared behind me. For the first time in years, I felt air in my lungs that didn't hurt to breathe. I moved to the coast after that. Far from the town where everything began, far from the cabin, far from the noise, I found a small house overlooking the sea. The waves were loud enough to drown out my thoughts at night. I started volunteering with a local victims advocacy group, helping other women rebuild their lives. Some days it's still hard. I still check my locks twice. I still wake up sometimes thinking, I hear that printer humming. But I'm learning what peace really means. It's not silence, not anymore. It's laughter. It's ocean waves. It's speaking your truth and refusing to let fear take your voice again. Last week, I sat down for a televised interview, the first and only one I agreed to. I told my story exactly as it happened, every detail I could bear to recall. I didn't do it for fame or sympathy. I did it because silence helped him hide for too long. The only way to end his story was to tell it. Afterward, families of the other victims reached out. One woman sent me a photo of her sister, smiling, alive, before she disappeared. "Thank you," she wrote, "for making sure she wasn't forgotten." I keep that photo on my desk. It reminds me why I survived. Sometimes when I walk along the shore, I think about that first day in the bookstore. The quiet man with the calm eyes who seemed so gentle. I wonder if he ever loved me, even in some twisted way. But then I remember the folder with my name on it, the rope in his suitcase, and I know the answer. He loved control. He loved silence. But now, the world knows the truth he tried so hard to bury. As I finish writing this, I can still picture his face in the courtroom. The cameras flashed, the judge spoke, and Nathan, Adrian Pike, sat there motionless, utterly silent. But for once, his silence didn't scare me. It defeated him, because now the quiet doesn't belong to him anymore. It belongs to me. He used silence to hide his crimes. I use my voice to expose them. She closes with the haunting image of Nathan's eyes in the courtroom, utterly silent, but defeated. I spent years running from his silence, afraid of what it hid. But now I understand that speaking the truth is the only way to end its power. The world finally knows who he was, and the women he thought he erased will never be forgotten. He's behind bars, and I'm free, not because I escaped him, but because I stopped being afraid to speak. Silence protected him once. My voice destroyed him. If my story made you feel something, anger, fear, or even hope, then you already know how dangerous silence can be. Every voice matters when the truth finally comes to light, and your support helps stories like mine reach others who need to hear them. So tell me, honestly, would you still trust someone who gives you peace if their silence ever started to feel too perfect?